Hello and welcome to Tech Raven. I'm Nigel and today I'm doing a review on John Rankin Waddell's, otherwise known as Rankin, BBC Maestro photography course that's been promoted by the BBC as an introduction to photography with the subheading Capture Striking Shots with the Legendary Photographer of Everyone from Stormzy to the Queen. The course costs £79 as a one-off payment and is made up of 35 videos totaling 4 hours and 8 minutes duration. I'm a photographer myself. I studied photography in London and ran a commercial studio specialising in advertising and fashion photography, where I primarily shot on 5.4 Cine cameras, Hasselblad and Mamiya medium format, as well as Nikon 35mm equipment, so I'm more than qualified to review this BBC Maestro photography course. Just so you know, I also reviewed another BBC Maestro course featuring Mark Ronson, the music producer. I have a small home recording studio, so I'm qualified enough for that review also. Link in the description below. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I gave Mark Ronson's course a spectacular review because it was absolutely incredible. However, this Rankin photography course is anything but. In fact, it's actually quite bad. Majority of the 35 videos are quite short, between 30 seconds and 10 minutes. 25 of the videos are under 10 minutes and 18 of those are under 5. As for the longer videos, they're mostly made up of Rankin having casual sit-down chats with another photographer, and most of these are actually quite boring and not educational or intuitive in the least. More padding than anything else. Although Rankin's a good photographer, I wouldn't say he was a great photographer. For me, Rosella Van Orn is a better beauty photographer, and Carl Taylor, that's Carl spelt with a K, is a better photographer in pretty much every area. Getting back to the course, the longer videos are nothing more than, frankly, dull conversations between Rankin and somebody else who works in the field of photography. These are not what I would call tutorials, and there's nothing educational in these casual sit-down chats. It's almost like eavesdropping in on a conversation between two photographers sharing anecdotes of the past, and in the case of the war photojournalist Giles Dewley, who comes across as nauseatingly annoying, and most of the time he's not even talking about photography. Instead, he just waffles on about cooking meals with friends that he met while in some unsavoury conflict zone, or telling some other boring non-photography related story that the viewer will take absolutely nothing from. Ironically, this particular video featuring Giles is entitled The Power of Portraiture, yet there's little to no talk of portraiture in it. Unfortunately, this isn't the last we see of Giles and his dull anecdotes. He appears twice more later in the course to bore us with even more futile non-photography related stories. Also, Giles can be heard swearing on a couple of occasions during these chats with Rankin, which sends the course even further down the toilet than it already is. How the BBC approved this so-called photography course is absolutely beyond me. Two more of the longer videos in the course are made up of Rankin having a casual chat with filmmaker and director Ken Kamara. Ken at least talks a bit more sense than the other guests, and he actually does speak about photography. But again, you won't really learn anything from these conversations, just a couple of guys talking shop with no actual photography tuition. Given the BBC promotes this course as an introduction to photography, nobody wants to listen to a couple of guys sharing stories. They actually want to learn something and be able to take something away from the course, which unfortunately won't happen here. In the Visualising Your Idea video, Rankin has yet another somewhat boring chat with a makeup artist called Heidi North, who frankly comes across a bit gormless with nothing to say. Again, you'll learn nothing from this chat. The 20-minute video entitled Creative Retouching features a post-production expert called Rick, who Rankin has yet another course filler casual chat with. Rick gives a few insights into what a retoucher does, using Photoshop in this instance, but again, there's no actual software tutorial here, just a few brief screenshots as he explains what a retoucher does. Again, another futile conversation that teaches nothing about post-production work. During the How to Build Your Photography Portfolio video, Rankin speaks to photographer and filmmaker Betsy Cameron. Again, this is just another casual sit-down chat between the two of them, but at least Betsy doesn't try to sell you the dream. And to her credit, she does mention the word saturation, suggesting that there are simply too many photographers out there all fighting over crumbs. Something I strongly agree with in this instance. So what you'll take from this section of the course is this: See your photography as a hobby because there's slim to zero chance of ever making any decent money out of it. And let's face it, if you're watching a course on photography, you're probably just starting out, so don't be under any illusions. There are probably 10 so-called professional jobbing photographers living in the same street as you are right now who have been fighting over crumbs a lot longer than you have. Eventually, Rankin does get out his camera and do a couple of small, short studio demos with 2 different models. But the lighting is basic at best, just one light, and he doesn't go into any great detail about anything. Instead, he just skirts around the edges, and he actually comes across as somebody who doesn't really know how to put their knowledge across. Rankin proudly quotes David Bailey as saying, "God only created one sun, so why use more than one light?" I personally think that David Bailey was a little overrated. He just happened to be in the right place during the swinging 60s and on the right scene at the right time. Just because you photographed iconic 60s women and Mick Jagger and Michael Caine doesn't make you a great photographer. If you look at Bailey's works, sure, they're correctly exposed and the composition's okay, but the lighting is usually very basic. The one thing that made those images interesting were the iconic 60s figures in them. But again, that didn't make them great photographs, and it certainly doesn't make David Bailey a great photographer. Personally, although I love many of Bailey's images, he was just a good photographer, not a great one. Unfortunately, the masses tend to associate photographs of famous people with great photographs, which is rarely the case. Just so it doesn't look like I'm picking on Rankin alone here, I should also mention Annie Leibovitz, the so-called iconic American portrait photographer. I wouldn't buy any of her photography courses either. Again, her photographs are good, but they're nothing special. They're just images of famous people, which, again, doesn't make them great images, and it doesn't make Annie Leibovitz a great photographer. In fact, photographer Bob Carlos Clark once said of Annie Leibovitz that she's usually surrounded by 4 or 5 assistants who are all probably better photographers than she is, that do all the hard work. And then when the subject and everything is all set up and the camera settings are dialed in, one of the assistants hands Annie a Hasselblad so she can rattle off a few shots before handing the camera back to the assistant. Then she walks around doing all that silly cliche hugging and kissing everybody while telling them all what a great job they did. And I'm thinking, yeah, they all did a great job, Annie. What did you actually do? I just don't buy into all this iconic celebrity influential photographer nonsense, because many of them are not what I would call top draw photographers. Certainly this is the case with David Bailey, Annie Leibovitz and Rankin. Let's just take a look at Rankin's photograph of the Queen, which I don't actually think is that good. If you look at the shot and then mentally replace the Queen with a model that you'd hired in and brought into a studio for a shoot, that shot wouldn't make your portfolio. At least it wouldn't find its way into mine, and here's why. The lighting's questionable. It looks to me like a single frontal light source, and judging by the catchlight bang in the middle of the Queen's pupils, it looks like a parabolic umbrella or a large ring light, as there's a black spot in the dead centre of that catchlight. This type of flat frontal lighting doesn't look that great in my opinion. I'm sure Rankin only had 15 minutes with the Queen, but it would have only taken me 5 minutes to erect a large octabox and place it as close to the Queen as I could get it, and at a 45-degree angle and slightly above, with a large white reflector on the opposite side to gently fill in some of the shadows. This would have created a more three-dimensional and sculpted lighting effect that would have been more flattering to the Queen, and more importantly, it would have looked more professional too. Another issue with this shot is the choice of aperture, quite stopped down judging by how much detail you can see in the flag behind her. The flag looks 3 to 5 feet away from the subject, and if I'd taken this shot, even with time constraints, I would have asked the Queen to step forward a few feet and open the aperture up to around f4, not to blow the flag totally out of focus, but just enough to send it more out of focus so it isn't a distraction to the main subject. Here, the Queen is supposed to be the hero of the shot, while the flag is supposed to be the supporting cast, but the flag is fighting in equal measures here. If I was taking the shot, I would have stepped further back and used a longer lens and opened up the aperture more, and that would have fixed the issue, yielding a better shot, with the Union Jack still being unmistakable due to its colours and design. In fact here, the Union Jack almost looks like a composite that was slapped on over a green screen. I'm not saying how this shot was done, which I'm sure it wasn't, but it just has that feel about it. Again, if this was a portrait of somebody you didn't know and not the Queen, it would be a happy snap at best, But it's the Queen, and Rankin is super proud of what I consider to be a below average portrait. During the natural lighting video, Rankin eventually pulls out a Canon DSLR and takes some shots of a lovely tall girl in his London flat using natural light coming in through the large floor-to-ceiling sliding doors that go out onto his balcony. Now for me there's an issue here because the young lady model towers over Rankin by about 8 inches, which is fine, but the way he photographed her wasn't. If I was photographing a model who was much taller than myself, I'd hop onto the first rung of a stepladder to get the camera lens level with her eyes for a beauty shot or close head and shoulders portrait, such as the one demonstrated by Rankin during this section of the course. But Rankin doesn't use a stepladder, so he ends up shooting up the model's nose. When I used to teach people about composition in video during interview situations, I'd always tell them to set the camera lens at roughly eye level to the subject being interviewed to avoid that horrible up the nose look, which isn't a good look at all, as you can see from the resulting images that Rankin took of this particular model while a reflector was being held under her chin. This up the nose shooting continued when Rankin moved outside onto his balcony. If he'd used a stepladder to get level with the model's eyes, the shots would have been stronger, as he would have been able to ask her to tilt her chin down to open up her eyes to make them look bigger, something you can't do when the model's already tilting her head down while looking into the camera lens. With a stepladder, the resulting images would have looked more pleasing, they would have been more flattering to the model too, as we wouldn't be looking up her nose in the final images. If this was a male subject, that unsightly nose hair probably would have required about 5 minutes of post-production digital nose hair plucking. I don't recall ever seeing photography tutorials and studio portraiture demos on YouTube that have been quite this uninformative and this bad, and that's saying something. Rankin also throws out the old cliche of practice, 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 which I don't subscribe to for 1 second. You need to learn how to do it right and be taught the correct techniques. If you don't get good tuition by a professional, you'll just be practicing bad techniques over and over again, and you'll only ever reach the levels of mediocrity. You can't learn to play a Beethoven sonata by simply sitting at a piano and hitting the black and white keys over and over again until it all falls into place. You need a good teacher to spend many hours showing you the techniques required to achieve such a level of skill and proficiency. I hate it when people say keep practicing and doing it and you'll get better, because it just isn't true. Jared Polin throws out the same futile advice on his YouTube photography channel too. Just get out there and keep taking pictures and you'll get better. No, you won't. You'll just end up taking loads of poor images over many years unless you know how to recognize and identify the issues in any given photograph, which most beginners don't. I often read on so-called professional wedding photographers' websites where they say they've shot hundreds of weddings, as if that makes them a great wedding photographer. Then when I've looked at their portfolios, it looks to me like they've just shot hundreds of substandard wedding photographs. So unlike the Mark Ronson music producer course that I found on the BBC Maestro website, which I highly recommend, I can't say the same of this Rankin course. In fact, calling it a course is a stretch. Would I recommend it? Well, you can take a wild stab in the dark at this point. It would be an absolute waste of £79, and there are way better tutorials that can be found free of charge on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description below if you do feel compelled to check out Rankin's course, but I'd advise against it. If you want to learn from the absolute best, you'd be better off checking out Carl Taylor's visual education website and subscribe to that instead, where you'll learn from a true professional who's at the absolute top of his game. There's nobody on the planet that sculpts and manipulates light like Carl Taylor, and he has such a range in that he's a master of pretty much any genre of photography that he turns to, be it a product shot, portrait, seascape, or outdoor location fashion shoot in an exotic location. I'll put a link to Carl's visual education site as well as his own personal portfolio site in the description below if you want to check that out, so at least you'll be able to take something away from this video review. So that's it. Until the next time, take it easy. Bye for now.